Everyone to this webinar. My name is Neville Mikey. I'm the CEO of Trade and Investment KwaZulu-Natal. These webinars, and I'd like to take this opportunity to also greet our Honorable MEC Ravi Pillay, who has joined us as part of the webinars. Honorable MEC has been quite supportive, really of session, and we appreciate that level of support from Honorable MEC. MEC Nomsa Dube Ngube will be joining us fairly shortly. She's just rounding off one meeting, as Puma has indicated. Part of the process that we've been engaging on with industry has been to ensure that there's a clear consultative process in communicating, particularly looking at key aspects that are linked to post-lockdown opportunities, and also looking at sector-specific issues perspective. But in this instance, we've also seen a growing number of companies that have also sought to raise their hand to support the medical sector, and to see how best they are able to also supply some products within that sector, support that sector. And also the most recent is through the leadership of our MEC to look at the establishment of a clothing and textiles SEZ within the province of KwaZulu-Natal, which we're doing in partnership with Dube Tradeport, as well as Edtea, because Edtea is a large landowner within. They own a number of facilities that most certainly can be utilized for the sector. As a result of that, the dialogue today really is to specifically deal with industry-related issues, to see how best we support the industry, and also to create an element where we can have a dialogue in respect of the sector. With those few words, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our MEC champion, the one that has been really supporting us from the very first webinar that specifically dealt with finance and accessing finance, and also participating in some of the other webinars where MEC has really been looking at various creative and strategic ways in which industry can collectively work very closely with government in order to support our industries. Let me take this opportunity to welcome MEC Ravi Pillay, who will then address us. MEC.
Thank you very much, Neville, and greetings to the team from Mr. Mukondiwa and Mr. Mtetwa, Mr. Shabalala, Mr. Herman Pillay, and Mr. Bellard, who I understand constitute your panelists today, and they are the real experts that we want to listen to today, and of course the engagement from all those who registered to participate in this very important webinar. Let me also just give some context that we are this is a spectrum of interests and business and economic activities behind this, what we're calling the economic recovery plan post-COVID. Some could argue that there's no real post-COVID in the medium term because of the nature of the disease and the time frame over which it's likely to be with us. But nevertheless, I think we are saying that we can't be paralyzed by it, and that economic recovery has to be part of our vision and some of our urgent. National government also has a similar approach of working in clusters. And we have 4 clusters, one of which is the economic cluster. We have a social cluster, we have a governance, and what is called a JCPS, Justice and Peace, which is really the law enforcement cluster. I serve on the economic cluster, and therefore I work under MEC Dube in this particular team as far as the economic issues are concerned. Now, at the risk of telling you things that you already know, but it's important to understand the context in which we are coming, and that is we are really in this disaster which has had a very, very dramatic effect, and we must be under no illusion about the extent of the disruption of the economy and the dangers that we face. I'm sure you're all aware that we're looking at anywhere between 1 million jobs to more being lost. I'm MEC for finance, so I have to keep a hawk's eye on what SARS is doing, and the kind of shortfalls we are anticipating are quite horrendous. But despite that, I think government has been quite bold in mobilizing the 500 billion package, and we need to understand that. But that 500 billion has to be financed somewhere, and part of that financing comes from cuts that we have to implement. Just to give you a taste of that, or a sense of it rather, 130 billion rand of that 500 billion rand will come from national departments cutting 100 billion rand off their line items. That will affect us because of certain conditional grants that come from national departments. And there's another 30 billion that comes from provincial budgets. So at the moment, I'm grappling with some numbers to cut some 6.2 billion of our line function departments. By no means an easy task. So it's a difficult set of circumstances, but we are saying that we are going to work through this. Broadly, our responses are threefold, right? We have the health side of things, and we can break that down, and I don't want to waste time on that, but very simply, you have the medical side, you have the social distancing measures and the lockdown regulations, the treatment side, the screening and testing side, the contact tracing, infrastructure and PPE aspects, all of which are broadly following under the health response, but obviously also has an overlap to the extent that there's procurement opportunities in those issues. The second pillar of response is the response to the vulnerable, and that's our poor. And that response can range from food parcels to the efficient operation of the unemployment insurance fund, the grants, then the top up of the grants and the new grants that we've issued, all of which is a major program and challenge on its own. And then the third aspect, of course, is what we are really busy here today with is the economic side, and even that is immediate, medium term, and long term interventions. In terms of the immediate responses, I think you've seen some of it in terms of the Reserve Bank's reduction of the interest rates, the loan guarantees. Now, this post-recovery plan, we were to look at it with specific reference to KZN, and the economic cluster looked at it and worked out the different sectors. And I just want to say to you that, look, each of these sectors as a work stream, and clothing and textile is one of 12 work streams that we have set up and then trying to drive in a very specific way. Just to give you a sense of it, you may be familiar, but just a quick reminder, there's the 4IR and ICT, the finance and fundraising, which has been mentioned, the health, innovation and manufacturing, trade and investment, the informal sector, industrial development, a multidisciplinary committee on red tape and regulatory issues, tourism, of course, which has been really smashed in this COVID context, agriculture, very important for us in KZN, infrastructure development, the creative economy, and clothing and textiles. Now, I want you to take some encouragement for the fact that clothing and textile has been lifted as a special work stream. It could very well have fallen under the broad manufacturing category. But because we recognize that clothing and textile has a particular history in our province and we think it has great potential, we debated and said that it must be a specific work stream for specific attention. And that's the context in which we are coming here today. I must add that, look, it's not a day for decisions, but the input from this webinar is going to be processed through this economic cluster, ultimately to the Provincial Command Council, which is the structure that is dealing with day-to-day issues, and the provincial cabinet, and even feed into national policy making as far as this particular sector is concerned. And of course, it's not going to be a one-off, and we will, want to have set a basis for continuous engagement as we go forward. Now, we think we have a sense of some of the issues that are critical for this particular sector. We understand the international context. There's been a battle over tariffs and imports, and I think that will be a continuous one. We understand that there are different players with different interests. You have the retailers, the big retailers, are a very important part of this equation, and basically stimulating the demand for the sector in order for them to revive and grow. We are very encouraged by some of the agreements we're seeing being reached at the national level, which are involving many key stakeholders, and they seem to have already grappled with some very difficult issues. And I would like to think they nevertheless set a basis from which we could move forward in a really constructive way. Of course, there are going to be hurdles and challenges, but we do think that the sector has capacity, it has a history, it has a workforce. The demand and procurement side is really what the nuts and bolts of our challenge is at the moment. So we'd like to think that this webinar brings together all the critical stakeholders, government, of course, facilitating it, organized, segregated in a way, in the sense that you have the well-established companies who have a long history, good capital, good skills, good capabilities. You have the smaller ones, still large, but also well organized. You have the difference between compliant and non-compliant. And then I also want to put on the table what I would call the new entrants, the real small entities, including cooperatives, which we want to provide a basis for the massification of opportunity at that level. We understand that these interests might not all be at the same level at all times, but I'm sensing a commitment to want everybody to come together to create a plan where everybody can benefit and grow this sector of the economy. In short, it talks to building a strong and sustainable social compact, as our president has been articulating for some time now. And in developing that coherent plan, we take along all stakeholders and deal with the issue of support, deal with the issue of policy, deal with the regulatory issues. And I'm sure ultimately financial issues are a part of it. But from what I've read of the documents that have been circulated and some of the activities happening in this sector, you're really quite ahead. And I think we just need to pull things together to make a quantum leap as far as this is concerned. So it's really about creating and buying into that vision and presenting this coherent plan to government for its support. And I think our vision will go beyond just KZN and South Africa, but even the SADC and even Africa as a whole. I think we're at a point where we really don't have any choice but to come together and confront the challenges we face, find new ways of doing things, and rely on our wonderful history of resilience and creativity to overcome these challenges. So Neville, thank you for having me, and I'm going to listen with great interest to the inputs that the panelists and those who are participating are going to make. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, MEC Pillay, and we want to thank your honor together with MEC Nomsa for this wonderful webinar that you have organized for our industry. We take it with the seriousness it deserves. So basically, we would like to thank you and all the leadership of our provincial government. So now my introduction is I am Stadium Kondiwa from the National Bargaining Council for the clothing manufacturing industry. And I'll be facilitating the conversation in line with some of the work that we already have started, which MEC Pillay you have already spoken to in quite some detail for the first meeting. Right. Now, I am going to give the industry overview initially, just to guide us into where the sector is currently, so that some of the key outcomes that we will have will actually be aligned to where the industry is at this stage. So I would request Steve to load my presentation, Thank you very much, Steve. Good, thank you very much. Right, next slide, please, Steve. Okay. So the COVID-19 economic recovery for the clothing and textile workstream intervention, we are looking at it as industry, basically as with our what we call a stakeholder engagement forum, which is the clothing, textile, footwear, and leather, with retail involved, because we have already started as an industry, as a sector, to work as a value chain in the same shops, in the market. From retail side, you see clothing is in the same shops where leather goods and footwear goods are. So the kind of challenges and the kind of market that we pursue is basically the same. So for the sake of the presentation, we will actually hear quite a bit of CTFL, which is basically we are one family because we're looking at it from a value chain perspective. So we go on to the next slide. Steve, thanks. Right, so the objective of the presentation is one, obviously I say to give a brief overview of our sector so that it can guide us in where we are going and I mean how we can look at the challenges together and look at opportunities. So we will go on to the next slide, which is just to give a brief overview of what this Productivity and Training Institute of the Bargaining Council is. So this is the Clothing and Textile Bargaining Councils in 2011, 2012. You have seen it necessary to have in the collective agreement what we call a Productivity and Training Institute. The main reason for this institute, which is basically the institute that I had, it's a branch of the Bargaining Council, National Bargaining Council, basically, is one, we identify industry challenges, we coordinate and support the implementation of interventions with the main focus looking at improving productivity. So we are looking at aggregate productivity of our sector, basically, competitiveness of our sector, and sustainability. So that's basically what we look at. And we also look at positioning our industry for sustainable growth. And with all this, it basically means we are looking at coming up with interventions that help us to come up with good adherence to good and fair labor practices. Business is also sustainable because we are supporting each other, workers together, business and retail. So that's basically what we're looking at. And in the same spirit, we're also now looking at key things like health and safety, because we're looking at COVID now. It has come to be one of the key factors of what we need to consider as a sector in terms of, are we complying, are we not complying? How can we help each other? Because we cannot allow certain practices to continue. So basically, that's part of what we look at as an institute under the Bargaining Council. So we are very, very privileged to be part of this forum because it talks exactly to the kind of interventions we are trying to drive as a sector, being the guys on the ground, running with each and every factory down on the ground. Thank you very much, Steve. We go to the next slide. So just to give an overview of employment strength for the sector, which I believe employers are also going to give us some information around that. So when we're looking at the clothing, textile, footwear, and leather industry, together we employ 90,000 people. So that's in the manufacturing sector. So we are looking at 68,000 roughly for the clothing, textile 12,000, footwear 8,000, just above 1,000 for leather. Then the national clothing manufacturing industry, we have 68,000 employees roughly. And of those, 50,000 are basically the registered companies. So those are the ones that we have sight of as bargaining councils because they are registered with the bargaining council. But we have got 20,000 that are in the other. So that's your cooperatives, informal sector, home industries. So that's quite a significant informal sector we have in the clothing industry. Then now, when we look at KZN, which is our region of focus, it employs 23,000 employees in the clothing sector, in the clothing manufacturing sector, which is basically 45% of the clothing manufacturing sector. Then we're looking at very large companies, which is above 200 people. We have 30 only. We have 33 companies that are medium. So I'm looking at companies that are employing at least 100 and above. So that's 33. The majority of our factories, which is 155 factories, are basically small. So we have got quite a big number of predominantly small factories. And what is of interest in noting the challenges that we face as an industry and as a sector is, when we look at the large factories, which is at the plus 200 factories, 87% of them are able to, are complying with the fair labor practices and gazetted employment conditions. 64% of the medium companies are basically complying with the fair labor practice and the gazetted conditions, and only 40% of the small, which is the 155 small factories, comply, which shows quite a challenge based on the size of the factories. But in general, because of COVID, our sector as a whole is challenged. I mean, we can say we are pretty much still down, though we are now at level 4 and trying to manufacture, but we have those structural challenges that we face as a sector. Next slide, Steve. Right. So just to give a brief snapshot, employers and retail will be able to give us a more fluent snapshot. On the CTFL side, we have an estimated local content of 30 to 35%. So that's what we manufacture in South Africa, which is on our retail stores, which basically means 65 to 70% is imported. Then our export constitute less than 1%. So you say our manufacturing as a sector constitute less than 1%, which is pretty much, we can say we don't export as a sector. But with the same spirit, we had started through our engagements as a sector with the national government, the labor and employers together with the retail, looking at the National Development Plan for 2030, which is the 2030 Master Plan, which is already in progress. The plan was looking at increase our local content on the market to 65% from 30%, 30 to 35% that I've spoken about. This basically was looking also at doubling our employment in the process. So we are looking at that number of 50,000 employed in our clothing and textile side, in the clothing manufacturing side. We're looking at going to 100. So as a sector, we're looking at improving from 90,000 employees to basically 180,000 employees with that kind of effect. So that's work that we're looking at. But obviously, we have a new challenge, which is COVID. But the dream is still alive. And I think there are opportunities that come actually with the challenge that we're facing. We go to next slide. Working together. So as labor across the CTFL sector and as employers across the CTFL sector, we have come up with serious engagements over the past few years. The latest one being the current one that we are working on, and the one that we have already agreed on in March 2020, which I'm sure employers and employer representatives will be able to deliver more of. So on the COVID-19, we believe we have to work together as a sector. So like the personal protector, and we work together with the challenges that are around. Then we have done conferences to looking at how can we reskill so that we can meet some of the growth perspectives that we're looking at and the challenges that we face on the market. So we have done what we call a workplace skills committee conference in 2018. We have done a bigger stakeholder conference in 2017, which was basically bringing clothing, textile, footwear, leather together so that we garner an agreement to happen in 2017 as a sector. How can we support each other? So that's what we're looking at. So with the same spirit now, we have COVID, and we believe we are going to be able to work together. We have concrete agreements that are on the ground. So we are basically working on that. So we also do a lot of skills audits, sectoral skills audits, productivity baseline assessments to look at where we lack and where our challenges are so that we can inform and talk to you, the provincial government supporting us, and our national government to say, as a sector, these are the kind of serious challenges that we face, so that we look at support as a sector. So we go to the next slide, which will just look at some of the challenges that we've been very open about as a sector, in terms of, if we are to grow, we know we have a serious challenge on technical and managerial skills. We know our manufacturing processes and equipment, by virtue of some of the smaller factories not being able to drive the initiative around new technologies, IT systems, safety systems. So we have quite a gap in that area in our small to medium enterprise factories, which is basically impacting also the whole sector and our capability to respond to some of these new products that are coming and that we can make and leverage on. So we also know that we have got local supply chain deficiencies. So there are so many other products that could be made locally, which we probably have to import. It could be your zips, it could be your buttons and so on, that we can leverage on. But at times, those kind of small items or trims give us a challenge, but it creates an opportunity again. But that's one of the kind of things that we see. We know we have got metros and non-metros. So that's our rural and city, more metro-based factories face challenges with the kind of skill that they can attract. So at times, a rural factory or a non-metro factory would struggle to get a high-level skill because no one doesn't want to move to the rural from there. So there are those kind of things that we work on, looking at how can we empower our sectors on it. But these are some of the gaps that create opportunities for us. So we talk of things, I think Mr. Pillay have alluded to the borders and, things that have been happening, some of the issues that we know about, which could be smuggled goods and so forth. So those things are obviously ongoing, but there are quite a lot on the top there that we can work on as a sector in terms of moving forward and building a sector even in a challenging time like this. Next slide, Steve, thanks. Right. So a number of opportunities that our sector has, obviously, that we can harness. We are looking at local purchases. Surely, if 70% of of goods on our market are imported, that creates a huge opportunity for a sector like ours, where the turnaround time for developing a new skill is less than a year, and the comparative cost of starting a new job is very, very low. It's probably the lowest. You are looking at 10,000 rands to start one new job in the clothing sector versus 150,000 for the engineer. Then obviously there is productivity losses that we face in the factories, opportunity that we can leverage on, especially with COVID now, that we cannot import easily, partly because of the challenge that every other market is facing. So we can leverage and have that first mover advantage in these kind of areas. So new technologies is something that we cannot go without talking about. So we are doing this meeting today on Zoom. We could probably have flown if it was in January to go to this meeting, but we have been forced by circumstances now to embrace new technologies. So it is the same vision that we believe, if we as a sector get the right technologies, leverage them with the right skills and with the right people, we can weather any storms in terms of being able to compete either on price against the East, against China, either on quality against looks for a financial return. And every investor looks for a lucrative industry. And I believe if we harness our opportunities well, this is the place where we know one very basic thing that a person will always think of in a state like this, in a situation like this, is clothing and food. Yes, so this is the sector which is very, very earmarked to be used in technical operator skills, to be able to drive these technologies. Very important is transformation. We cannot continue with the kind of scenario, where we don't have compacts, where we don't have black and female management in our factories, where we don't have black industrialists at a reasonable representation in our factories or in our sector. So these are programs that are already supported, and we have factories that are already existing in this kind of environment, obviously facing different challenges. But as we grow, as we take advantages of this new market that the COVID has opened, it's an opportunity for us to drive those. And as a sector, we have a very good agreement to support our skills. We've got our skills accord to train young ladies, to train young black guys to become the new managers, to support black industrialists in the sector. Then obviously we are looking at ethical responsibility in terms of whether it's procurement and environmental responsibility in how we relate to the industry as a sector, and fair and equitable operating environment. So those are the kind of things that are opportunities for us. So this was just to give a view of the kind of interventions and the kind of mindset that the industry was already working on in trying to pave a new path for itself, which I believe COVID being a challenge to the world economy, to the world, brings in a lot of opportunities that can actually support that initiative of growth. So with this, I'll say I'll leave my counterparts from the sector, from the manufacturing sector, from the retail, to give us more detailed input, because they own factories, they are on the ground, they have the direct challenges that they are facing currently. So I think that's more of what we are looking at as a starting point. And obviously we will grow in the medium term and in the long term. So I would like to say thank you very much all for the overview that I've just given in brief. The presentation will obviously be given to the teams later on for those who want to look at it later. But without wasting more time, I would like to leave our time to the next speaker, whom I will present. So that will be Mr. Herman Pillay. Mr. Herman Pillay is a very well established industry stakeholder in terms of supporting and running vibrant, very, very big business in the sector. So he's going to look at the development of the industry with key focus on the short term to address the immediate challenges that we know have come with COVID, how we can look at job retention from the manufacturing side, the immediate challenges that the manufacturers need support on, and some of the initiatives that as employers they are looking at in terms of supporting, in terms of trying to keep the business alive. But obviously the most important part is we are all here to support. So they will also share with us where we can work together so that we move in the same direction. Over to you, Mr. Herman Pillay.
Thank you, Steady. Honorable MEC Ravi Pillay, esteemed colleagues of the CTFL sector, representatives from Labour, I want to greet you on this very cool Wednesday afternoon. I know that we are currently living in a time where we are navigating in uncharted waters. And I think that it's time for us to realign ourselves, to reorganize ourselves. And let me begin. Can you guys see my slides?
We all good?
Okay, good. So you would notice that I said COVID-19 business unusual. The COVID-19 pandemic has obviously brought a curveball to the CTFL, which we were not expecting. I mean, we were preparing for bigger things and brighter things in the year 2020, and this has obviously given us some unfortunate shortcomings. But nevertheless, let me just start off by just giving an industry overview. I know Steady has started with some. I just want to get into or delve into the stats. We have plus minus 90,000 CTFL workers in South Africa, and that's the formal employment. We have 130,000 which includes both informal, our CTFL sector that's based in KZN. So you can see just by those numbers, it's the largest. We have 113 companies that are NBC compliant, which is the national bargaining compliancy. And then you have 105 companies that are non-compliant. In our sector, each worker supports 5 dependents. What's interesting to note that our sector is made up of 94% Black, 80% female. An interesting point to note is that 4 out of every 5 employees are female in the clothing, textile, footwear, and leather sector. A large number of factories represented in the sector are also SMMEs. We're located in the province of KZN in the rural industrial towns of Ladysmith, Isitebe, Newcastle, then of course there's Shepston, eThekwini, etc. We have various linkages with other sectors and value chains like the cotton value chain, shipping and logistics, etc. And we have a revenue that we achieved for 2019 of 75 billion Rand, which is a contribution to our fiscus. Pre-COVID-19, we had, from the years 1996 to 2013, we had 160,000 CTFL jobs that were lost. And that was obviously stemming from some of the government policies that we entered into the World Trade Organizations. We saw a bloodbath of 160,000 jobs that was lost then. We then saw from 2013 to 2019 a significant improvement in the employment numbers, and we saw a huge reduction, although there were job losses, but it was not in comparison to the bloodbath of 1996 to 2013. In pre-COVID-19, we found an urgent need to revive the clothing and textiles in KwaZulu-Natal, in fact, in the entire country, and we focused on KZN as well. And President Ramaphosa, together with industry stakeholders, he signed off the historic Retail, Clothing, Textile, Footwear, and Leather Master Plan 2030. Just to give you some input on the master plan was aimed at adding 110,000 jobs to the South African economy, which means from the retail, clothing, textile, footwear, and leather jobs. And this was dependent on the local CTFL retail sales increasing from 76 billion to 2030, and local manufacturing purchases increasing by 35 billion Rand. This would have required structural change within the value chain. They identified 5 strategic pillars, which was the domestic market growth, increasing purchases from local suppliers, enhancing value chain competitiveness, driving industry transformation, and bolstering value chain skills and technology levels. To sum it up, the vision of the master plan could be summed up in 8 points. The first being substantially grow local purchases and by implication, the local value addition. So the current local contribution by retailers was sitting at 44%. The aim was to grow that to 65% by the year 2030. Point 2 was to enhance the value chain's cost, the process and product competitiveness. Point 3, embrace new technologies, especially those that supported shorter lead times within the value chain. Point 4 was improve financial returns throughout the value chain to ensure greater levels of investment and by implication expanded economic activity. We kind of gave an acknowledgement to the minister that we will explore means to work with our local health departments and also to work with government parastatals that have access to property that's in close proximity to our businesses, where we would co-jointly assist in testing of not only employees, but to a large extent public, assisting government by ramping up on testing facilities. KZN Clothing and Textiles is currently under huge duress. We, during the COVID-19 and just on the onset of the outbreak, received mass cancellations from South African retailers. They were not going to trade, they were going to miss the season, and they started canceling bulk cancellations, mass cancellations to manufacturers. This is something that we didn't cater for. Insurance companies have no policy against COVID-19 pandemics or pandemics that could kind of offset the losses that we are currently incurring. And this has set many businesses back to the point of closure. And we will see a high percentage of job losses because supply chains are disrupted and import of raw materials are delayed because of port restrictions. And whilst that is happening, we still have not really mastered the management and controls of customs fraud and illegal imports. So that's still somehow, the PPE, for example, there was still customs fraud. There was still illegal imports with PPE products coming into the country. So there wasn't. We are fighting in a very difficult climate currently as manufacturers. Level 4 also meant that we had to get a phased-in return to work, which meant that we are operating with 30% of our workforce currently, 25 to 30% of our workforce currently, to stave off the increase of the infections. But some businesses in the clothing, textile, footwear, and leather sector cannot operate on 25 or 30% of employees because they run complicated businesses and they need much more employees to be in attendance. And this in itself poses a huge problem for our sector. The phased-in return to work also means that we get lower output, irrespective if it's PPE or if it's a return to work on fashion products, but we have lower output from our facilities. And that's unsustainable because if you relate our fixed costs that we got to pay, some landlords are obviously giving some concessions where others are not, based on the lease agreements that they have. And this as well is kind of just making it even more difficult for the sector. In 2019, there were 21 factories that closed in KZN that resulted in 7,348 job losses. In January 2020 to date, there were 2 big factory closures reported resulting in 1,523 job losses. And these figures were obviously given to me by the National Bargaining Council. In KZN currently, there's a prominent textile mill that was established in KZN in 1968, frame knitting, that announced closure in February 2020. So currently, the clothing and textiles is in massive duress. However, in the difficult times that we find ourselves in, there's also opportunities that have created itself and presented itself. We have a diversification at our facilities where we've now moved from fashion to manufacturing personal protective equipment and in the form of masks and hospital gowns and coveralls and aprons and boot covers and head covers. It's stuff that we've never worked with really before. So we kind of infringed on the other PPE manufacturers that do this on a daily basis because there's such high demand of PPE currently from the health sector and need to have masks on every South African in the country. So the timing right now for investment is perfect. There's a local demand for PPE raw material from textile mills. We find that some of the textile mills in KZN are actually working to capacity. Some of them are considering working different shifts. And so are manufacturers as well because of the phased-in approach. We are looking at now working different shifts to try to optimize our fixed costs. We have larger businesses that are looking for new investments and new shareholders, in particular African shareholders and investment partners. We have an opportunity of greenfield and brownfield investments in our sector. We have innovative skills development strategies that we need to develop with the CETA. that we have never done before in terms of aligning our sector and developing our sector to kind of combat viruses like this and being prepared for viruses like this in the future. And then there's obviously the inclusion of local businesses in the SEZs that creates an opportunity because there's massive inquiries that we now have for export. And we find that normally in the SEZs, there's a strong focus mainly on foreign businesses. And I feel that now the opportunity has created itself where local businesses could consider export again with this huge fallout with China that we are seeing globally. You know, if anything, we have gone to a realization or brought to a realization that we were highly dependent on China. That's retail and manufacturers. And the dependency of China has been slowly kind of released. Not too long ago, we heard the Prime Minister of Japan making a statement to say that he's pulling out all Japanese companies from China, and his government was going to put in billions of dollars just to keep them in Japan and to create a supply chain in Japan and to reduce the dependency or remove the dependency from China. America is adopting the same attitude, and I think now is the time where we can start looking at local initiatives to optimize our value chains and our supply chains in South Africa. And KZN, being 43% of our sector, is the ideal province to look at these things. What we feel should happen is a proposed KZN COVID-19 clothing, textile, footwear, and leather stimulus package. This package, we understand that there's 500 billion that's being set aside, and I hear you, MEC Pillay, that you said that 30 billion needs to come from the province that then gets directed to the 500 billion, and 100 billion comes from national government. I hear you, but I feel that with the amount of people that's employed in the CTFL sector, we need some form of stimulus package to rebuild us and to get us on the road of recovery. And yes, we will open up our facilities, we'll open up our businesses, and we will meet the provincial government halfway, but we feel that that stimulus package should be looked at and addressed, and that KZN provincial government should obviously get their fair allocation, and we can work with strategic partners like the KZN Growth Fund, Itala Bank, etc., in kind of initiating these things. But we've got to have this urgent funding because businesses, both SMMEs and also large businesses, are currently in high distress. There's also PPE manufacturers that have sprung up, and they would need bridging finance and working capital for PPE products, like a small SMME, and the SMMEs start from 5 employees and grows up to 50 employees, and then you have medium sized businesses that grow up until 150 employees, and then obviously there are the larger businesses. But we feel that we've got to have assistance during this time. Qualifying businesses obviously can prescribe to these stimulus packages. They obviously must meet the criteria of being tax compliant, National Bargaining Council compliant, and they must adhere to the COVID-19 health and safety regulations in order for this kind of package to be directed their way. It should be extended as well, not only to companies that are part of the bargaining process, but it should be extended to cooperatives that comply with the letter and the spirit of the Cooperatives Act to make it fair on the businesses that are represented in KwaZulu-Natal. And that's basically where we find ourselves at the moment. I strongly believe that we are in a position that is difficult and is challenging, but together with government and the private sector working together, we can overcome this difficulty and this hardship together, and we can kind of ride this wave and see ourselves through a new day that's refreshing and that brings new life and hope to many South Africans. Thank you.
All right. Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Pillay. Thank you very much for the presentation. Quite detailed, very clear. And I think to the participants, I mean, if you have questions, you can type your questions on the question and answer panel there, so that we will be able to look at the questions, and we will answer all the questions later on after the presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Pillay. Just to give a bit more detail of him, I think I gave a brief detail of him. He is basically the deputy chairperson of the Apparel and Textile Association of South Africa, which is called ATASA, which is the biggest employer association in the clothing and textile industry in South Africa. And he's also the CEO of TCI Apparel, which is the biggest employer in the sector as well, employing close to 4,000 people. So, Mr. Pillay, thank you very much for sharing with us the reality of where we are. We respect and thank you for the time that you have made. I know we were supposed to be in the bargaining council meeting, paving way for other work, but you saw it necessary to come and share with the bigger forum how we can also drive it from the KZN angle and the national angle as well. So we now go to the next speaker. So we have heard Mr. Pillay, who's from the manufacturing, and our relationship is not complete in the value chain if we don't talk to retail. So we would like to have someone from the retail to share with us, and we have Natasha Ambrosio from the Mr. Price group. Natasha is the head of sustainable value chain, which pretty much, I believe, talks to some of the initiatives that we are trying to work on as a sector. And she is going to look at the effects of COVID on the retail sector, and how retail also intends to manage some of the challenges that we have heard of. I think there will also be some questions that she will answer in her presentations to what we have heard from Mr. Pillay, cancellations of orders and so forth. And obviously, the most important part is how do we retain our market share and grow it, whether it's during the COVID or post-COVID. So I'll hand over to you, Natasha. Okay, where is Natasha?
Hello?
Good. Yes, Natasha, yes.
You want to hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Steady. And thank you for the opportunity. And just to reach out to everybody, obviously all the key stakeholders that are represented here today. So I was asked to just kind of share from our retail perspective how we're managing the uncertainty and I guess the disruption of COVID-19. And I think for everybody on this discussion this afternoon, this is not something that anybody knew was going to hit us. Very little to prepare us for this. And so what I just can say is, first and foremost, in terms of how our business have managed the process, is really from day one to just get together a task team and work through all the different challenges that we faced. And one of the things that we made a decision on as a business is to be fair in the decisions that we make as best we can. And I think even with our suppliers, how we've tried to engage, and these were not easy decisions. I mean, as Herman was saying, every retailer had to deal with the fact that we didn't know when we were going to trade again. And therefore, when you don't know when you're going to trade, you don't even know what stock you're going to need by the time you open your store. You don't know how many customers are going to come back. There's so many uncertainties. But if one of the first decisions we made was, how do we make sure that we're fair in the decisions that we make? And so we tried to do that as best we can with our suppliers. And I think we tried to also deal with our decisions quite individually with suppliers. So we didn't just take a blanket decision. We tried to honor the products that we had already ordered. Where there was investment in raw materials in our supply chain, we tried to pay suppliers for those costs. And then obviously going forward in terms of orders, that was the uncertainty that we just didn't know. And we really try, and even now, to work very closely with our suppliers to plan that. So from our own business perspective, we're quite fortunate in the fact that we did have some cash reserves, and it did help us to weather quite a bit of the storm in terms of protecting even the people that work for us. But I have to be honest in saying that I don't think it's anything different to any business that is represented here today. We had to really go back to our operational costs and really look at what was essential and what was not essential, and take things right down to the bone. Now, as a value retailer and as a person who've worked for Mr. Price from 1993, it sits within our blood. I mean, that's how we operate, and we always got to look at our cost lines. So it wasn't something that was necessarily new or different for us. But I don't think in the history, in the 27 years I've worked for the company, have I actually seen something as drastic as this. And I think it was the responsible thing to do, because we're obviously trying to protect people that work for us as well and make sure that we can pay them and remain in business. So that's really how we've approached it. And I think just going forward, we obviously have been part of some industry programs for quite some time. And I really want to mention the cotton industry. I see there was a question about that as well. So for the last 7 years, we've been involved in trying to help South African cotton get back into an industry that is recognized. At the time that they approached us, the Cotton SA team, South Africa had its lowest production in history. I think it was something like 5,000 tons. This was 2013. And what it showed me through this journey was, if all the stakeholders get together and we put on the table what we want to achieve, it's incredible what can happen. Because in the 7 years that we've worked with the South African cotton industry, we've actually seen a 775% increase of production. Now, this has happened in a time where we all know has been a tough economic time anyway. This is pre-COVID. So I really, that showed me how when business gets together and we put on the table what it is we want to achieve, because that was the key driver, how are we going to create jobs? And so that's a success story that we can look at and say, if we actually follow the journey within our own industry now in terms of the value chain, we can achieve this. So I really want to encourage everyone to say that, yes, we face COVID and we know it's going to be a tough time. But I really think that if the master plan is something we've been involved in and we've got a plan, I keep thinking how incredibly, what a good position we are in, because it's not like we as an industry still have to build a strategy. We've got a strategy, and we had it before COVID-19 hit us. So if we could take that plan, and it's incredibly comprehensive, and yes, it's going to take a lot of work, but I think if we can take that plan and really activate what it's meant to do, it's a good framework. Nothing's perfect, but if we take that framework and we activate it, I'm encouraged by the fact that every retailer in South Africa has signed up to that plan. It's the first time in history, and so for us as a retailer, to be able to stand with other retailers and say we're gonna unlock this plan. Of course, COVID-19 will impact on it. There's no doubt. We put all our numbers together pre-COVID. We don't know what trade is going to be like. I can just say that in our business, we're already revising those numbers. We're looking at reforecasting them. And I cannot say at this point what they look like, because I'm still waiting for them to come back. But I do think that our commitment is still there. And I don't think it's any different for any of the other retailers that have been involved in this master plan. So I think the good news for KZN is that, yes, we have an industry, and yes, we are threatened through the disruption that we're facing. But I think the fact that retailers at the table, and no doubt there's complexity. In the years that I've now worked very closely with suppliers, we cannot underestimate the complexity that we are facing. But I think if we really think about a just transition plan, then I think we can do this. Yes, the fourth industrial revolution is a concern as well. We've got to think about what the impact on jobs are going to be, but it's a wave that's going to hit us, and it's something we can't really ignore. If we're talking about social and environmental compliance, we're going to have to embrace new technologies as well. But we have to come with a plan that actually gives us the opportunity to protect jobs at the same time. And we don't have the answers necessarily, but I think if we sit together as a collective, and we certainly as a retailer are prepared to do that. We've, as I said, walked a journey with the cotton industry for 7 years, and there are still tension, there are still complexity in the value chain, there's still issues that needs to be dealt with. But I do believe that we can do it. And I really welcome this kind of engagement. It's fantastic to see how KZN has actually pulled everybody together and that we're having this conversation. So really just from our side, as a business, we are committed, we're in the engagement, we know that we ourselves are not perfect and we've got a lot of things to fix, but we're prepared to work together with our value chain in KZN and in South Africa to really make this work and to take this master plan and make it happen.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Thanks a lot for the presentation. You've made it quite clear what the challenges are, the difficulties to plan in such an environment, and it's very, very clear. But we thank you very much for the spirit that the retail remains with, which is basically to be part of this train of turning around our sector and reclaiming our position worldwide as a clothing, as a clothing sector. So we thank you for that, and I think there are some questions that will come from the panel. We will have some question and answer sessions. So we will go on to the next speaker. So our next speaker, we are going to have an executive from the cluster. So as an industry, as a sector, we have very progressive clusters. So that's companies that have come together to look at the challenges together, to look at collective efficiency, working together, which is quite a good example of how we can do things going forward. But the most important part is they've got quite a number of variables and benchmarks that they look at internationally, locally, and so on. So we have Kyle. Kyle Ballard is an executive in the KZN Clothing and Textile Cluster. He is going to take us through a presentation around the challenge that we have currently and how we can articulate the skills and all the kind of work that they've done together as a way of paving our improvement plan. Over to you, Kyle.
Thanks, Eddie. I trust that the presentation's up. If not, and you can hear me fine. If not, then
it is up.
Okay,
now, yes.
Great. It's been a little over an hour, I think, while we've been sitting. Just want to encourage everyone who's presumably sitting in front of a laptop or a phone just to stand up, have a stretch, get the blood pumping a bit. I have, and then sit down and listen, please. I have about 5 slides to cover. I'm not going to take long, but the contents I really do believe will hopefully help. Essentially, I'd like to provide a framework for us to understand the problems that have been mentioned, some of them. I'm going to hopefully provide a few more that, and most importantly, around solutions in the short, medium, and long term for our sector. But just to reiterate, I'm really honored and privileged to be able to present this and to help wherever we can. As a cluster, we've been very busy with manufacturers. A lot of the attendees on this session have been active participants in some of the working group sessions we've been facilitating, which I'll speak to just now. And really, I just want to share some of the learnings that we've had from that, and some of that framework that I mentioned, that how we're understanding and conceptualizing the problems and solutions going forward. So I'm really not going to discuss the cluster. This first slide is just to provide some insight into who we are. The KZN Clothing and Textile Cluster, as mentioned, we've got various funders who support us and members as well, of course. We had a surge in membership during lockdown, funny enough, due to this COVID support that we've providing, and we're really trying to improve the competitiveness of the industry, as many other stakeholders are as well. So there's effectively 3 phases of support that we are conceptualizing for members and also for KZN as an industry more broadly. And our response phase 1 really was instituted just before lockdown, as we could see that it was probably going to come, and it was containing risk mitigation really to respond to the health crisis, and then quite quickly became the resultant recession. So risk mitigation, yes, to the virus spreading, but then also what do I do with my business with no sales, etc. And I'll speak to that just now. We're now moving with phase 1 still in place and running in parallel with phase 2, where we're assisting companies to demonstrate preparedness. So that those 2 words being a bit of a slogan to say, let's demonstrate preparedness for day 1 to around about 60 days, because of the many different new requirements for business to adjust to the new circumstances and new context. And I'll speak through that some more as well. And then lastly, phase 3, we're looking to revive demand and protect supply chains for economic recovery. So, and I'll speak through that some more as well. But just so I've literally got 1 slide for each phase, and I'll go through it. This, I'm not going to go through all of this detail, but this, and it seems overwhelming, so bear with me, but this here is really phase 1. We started with these 2 questions up top to say, what do companies need to manage the immediate health crisis, followed by the sudden financial shock, and what is the fastest way to collect, digest, and share information? Effectively, we identified these 5 risk mitigation areas: financial, people, operations, business continuity, and supply chain related risks. In them were various aspects, some of which has been mentioned already. So, for example, sales is gone as lockdown starts. What do you do with obvious fixed and variable, somewhat semi-variable costs? It's obvious cash flow and liquidity crisis there. People issues, and so on. So all of the implications from then on. What the support that we've been providing to members has primarily been in the form of online facilitated working groups, which I've put on the right here in this blue box. We've got dedicated teams tracking and collating the latest information, developing some tools, and networking, obviously. And then we've established smaller working groups now, really focused on implementation, problem solving, and very focused discussions to each business around what their challenges are specifically. And the next phase, phase 2, is much the same at first. It looks like the same, but the order of these economic these risks have changed. And this is really just the recognition around the recession now being the crisis that's needing to be mitigated along with the virus as well. So those 2 questions up at the top were important to us again. So we were asking of ourselves for the companies we're working with, what must companies do to survive from day 1 to day 180 or shorter in some cases? What is the best way to empower these companies? And so we've begun to understand that obviously market demand is the first place to start. Companies have quickly realized that they don't know what's coming on the other side of lockdown, and on average, and variations of this obviously, but on average we're looking at approximately 30% down of sales post-lockdown. Pockets of unusual demand like the masks, but relatively short term, and any other PPE as well. And then from understanding market demand, the rest follows. So once you understand what your market looks like, possibly a new market, your financial implications then follow: operations, people, supply chain, etc. It's worth recognizing here that we need to we've shifted towards tool development in this space because we're wanting to have almost surgical precision and evidence-based decision making in this space. So we don't want companies to overreact, possibly with cost reduction, or to underreact. And so having strong and analytical tools to understand first your market, finances, etc., is really important for that purpose, along with various other tools as well to understand your supply chain, for example, and the usual health and safety guidelines, SOPs, etc. Then to the third phase, towards economic recovery. There's two broad sections here. First, reviving demand, and this is sort of reiterating the point from the previous slide around understanding your market demand. We need to. This is a retail-led value chain, or buyer-led value chain, and so reviving demand has to be the first place that we start. It's clear that from some of the conversations, at least with Ibrahim Patel lately, and in general in the country, that companies, including retail, need to demonstrate that preparedness that I was referring to earlier in both the retail bricks and mortar stores, to be open with a broader range of products possibly as well. So effectively, if companies are able to demonstrate this preparedness sufficiently, then we should be able to move through the levels. So from level 4 to 3 to 2, etc. That should then begin to open up demand more so. But it's got to start with demonstrating preparedness in the way that we mitigate viral risks. Firstly, like things like social or physical distancing in a factory, hygiene practices, etc., that have been mentioned. But just the complications of that, obviously, in the factory environment. Second bullet point there is around preferential procurement, to be aggressively focused on local manufacturing. Some of this has been mentioned earlier, but we've obviously seen that the sort of wholesalers who are importing these products have begun to dominate the market, which is unfortunate and really can't be accepted. The third point there around e-commerce, we need to reopen that as soon as possible, fully. And we need to also recognize and prepare for some of the examples of system vulnerabilities. So as a spike in demand occurs, as we've seen in some of the European e-commerce retailers, preventing the whole system crashing and potentially the whole business crumbling as well, just because of that massive spike that damages systems. And the fourth bullet point there is a ruthless focus on rapid response to customer preferences. So again, just reiterating the demand-led recovery, we've got to understand what the customer wants and needs at this point, and produce and sell that, and nothing else really. It's got to be ruthless and focused on that. The local procurement obviously helps with supplying into that space. Then the section below around protecting supply, we again need to demonstrate ability to operate safely, demonstrate preparedness, particularly with these new rules and regulations that are coming out, and some of it has been mentioned. We're going into a lot of detail with various companies one-on-one to ensure that each company's plans are in place, and I think that has to continue throughout the province. In the short term, the PPE and masks and so on being produced locally is going to be really important. But it's worth re-emphasizing that it is short term, but it is helpful for businesses to essentially survive. For those businesses who can shift into this to survive the low demand in the short term. In the medium to long term, we need to pursue this. There's a term called sovereign supply chains that is emerging globally, which is in reference mostly around public procurement, but I think we think it applies to both public and private value chains. And really it relates to stronger localization, and I think government and other support institutions need to support that conversion towards sovereign supply chains. So reconsidering where production is positioned globally for a retailer is going to be really important, as well as obviously in the public sector to ensure that local supply is prioritized. Then the next bullet point there is leveraging Industry 4.0 technologies. I know it seems a little further down the line for most businesses, but we are going to need to be considering these technologies for value chain alignment. And what I mean by that is increased visibility within the local value chain to understand where local and global value chain to understand where product is being procured from, and then the associated risks by having procurement in those different areas, as well as for the various productivity gains that can come about from Industry 4.0 technologies being adopted. And then lastly, on just considering scale solutions. So we've been really encouraged by the willingness to share, the collaboration that has just gone to another level, at least with the members that are in our cluster and the other clusters that we oversee, where clusters provide that means to share knowledge at scale very quickly, and not only share it but develop what is the best approach to mitigate the various risks we've discussed, and quickly disseminate that amongst the different members. And we haven't seen any other mechanism that can do that at scale and so effectively. So we've been really encouraged by that, and just wanted to share that as something to consider in the way that we consider economic recovery going forward. That brings me to the end. Please contact us if you're interested. We are really encouraged to see the collaboration that is occurring, not only between companies, but also the different support institutions. Thanks again for having us here, and anyone wants to chat or ask questions, I'll stay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Carl. Thanks for quite a technical but very thoughtful presentation, which talks to the variables and structured approach to some of the challenges that we see. That we have and that we see in the industry. And we really appreciate this amount of detail, this type of detail, because just from our engagement as a sector with the small to medium enterprise factories, quite a number of them don't have this kind of thought process in the approach. So at times reacting to some of the challenges becomes a bit emotional rather than technically informed by the kind of work that we do. So I think there's quite some engagements that could be done in that area. But like we said, we are here together to pave a new way and look at this new horizon that is ahead of us. So thank you very much for all the participants. We will, I think, now go on to the question and answer session. Apologies. One of our panelists from the union who was supposed to attend unfortunately couldn't make it. So I think we have enough discussions from the guys that were here. We also want to express that you see that there was no one from the textile directly, from the textile sector directly. We couldn't get a participant because of the short time that we had to prepare, but we had shared some information with them. Yes, it could be indicative information, but going forward, they are part of this forum and they will be participating, and they will also have the recording of what we have discussed, so that the solutions, they have an input, but going forward, they are going to be participating directly as well. So even if there are questions that are sort of related to textile, we can also raise them. I think there's quite a multi-skilled team here that can also assist in addressing some of them so that we don't leave whatever we can from this forum. So thank you very much. So we will move on to questions. I would request my technical team to assist on how we will go through the questions so that people can participate or other panelists can participate. Okay, Steve. Okay, sorry, Steve.
Steady, yes.
Yeah, so what I'm saying on a question and answer, we have questions. So I'm not sure how we'll go through because it could be that any one of the panelists would want to answer. So how would we go through it? Can they unmute to answer?
Panelists can unmute themselves to answer and
All
go
right.
through it quite comfortably.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. So thank you very much. Apologies for consulting when we're already in the forum. It's not the best practice, but anyway, for the sake of progress, we will have 15 minutes to look at questions and answers that have been raised. So I'll look at the first question, which is from Ina Cronje, which says, clearly we need a massive Buy South African drive in the CTFL sector. Why do we not hear more about that now that clothing stores are open again? So that's one question. I will read 3 questions at a time, then we'll give to the panelists to participate. Right. Then the second question is, so why has iTech announced that masks and other PPE is now both duty-free and VAT-free? Surely this will damage or kill the local efforts to produce. So that's from Greg Harrison. Then I will go to the third question from Andrew Fenwick. Thanks to all the panelists. Can I clarify that footwear and leather good is also part of the clothing and textile? Okay, I'm from Sedler, so I think that's more of a comment. Surely, yes, you are. And I think we are happy with your participation, and we are basically in the same forum. So thanks a lot. So I'll hand over to our panelists to attack these questions that I've given at this stage. Thanks.
I'm happy to maybe just speak to the question from Ina around the Buy SA campaign. So what I can report is that fortunately this is also one of the key targets of the master plan, and there are a number of retailers that have actually become members of Proudly SA, our business included. There are other retailers that are not necessarily members of Proudly SA, but are actually starting to promote certain products in the stores and telling customers that these are manufactured in South Africa. So there are definitely plans, and I know in our business we rigorously working on labeling all the products that we can so that the customers can actually see and distinguish the South African products quite easily. From a cotton perspective, we have for the last 2 years been promoting the South African cotton products in the towels that we sell. So I think there is definitely more momentum, but you're absolutely right. We should be putting that onto a high profile. And I know Proudly SA is also doing a lot of work on various different platforms to promote for consumers to prioritize and buy South African products.
Maybe to add to that, it's Kalia from the KZN CTC. We've just been really encouraged to see the response and probably more so the awareness within the public as a customer base to see the need to buy locally. And so, yeah, even though, although obviously we need it as retail and production, I think the customers are actually asking for it increasingly, which is really positive.
Because I don't think MEC, I'm not sure where she's stuck. Let me just find out. Initially, it was supposed to be her.
Eddie, can we move on to the next question? Steady, are you?
Unmute. Thank you. Hello? All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think there was a noise on the background, so I thought someone was trying to speak. But we will move on to the next question now. Right, which is also from Andrew, which is, it may be a good idea to have a central list of local suppliers that can produce various items that retailers may need in the short term, sorry, and going forward. They could also be a part of the master plan 2030 going forward if they are not in the process already. If there is anyone in this grouping that can fit into this idea. So I will also, okay, from our panelists, this I think you see this question, you can also assist us. So we'll just go on to the next question, which is what year employment strength is taken from? So I think that is talking to my presentation. So I'll give an answer to that. Then we go on to the next question, which is okay, from Razin Dada. Thank you for this opportunity and for having this meeting. We sell textiles in the industry. My question is as follows. Why does the KZN clothing and textile sector set such low targets for themselves? The aim here is only revival. This is a very vast and difficult target. Why can we not aim into the #1 clothing and textile sector in the world? Doubling employment is too small. We can multiply employment tenfold, if not more. Why not 100-fold? Okay, that's on this first question. Then the second question is, we have the skill and the labor to be the best and the most successful and wealth textile in the world. Why don't we set ambitious targets and get everybody to play their part to ensure KZN becomes the best and the most wealth textile in the world? So I'll hand over to my colleagues, panelists, to answer these 3 questions. Then I will answer last on the data.
So Steady, it's Herman Pillay speaking. I
Yes,
think
sir.
we missed one question, which was from Greg Harrison. It was, why has ITAC announced that masks and other PPEs now both duty-free and VAT-free? Surely this will damage or kill the local efforts to produce. So I am in no way speaking on behalf of ITAC, but I think I can speak and just apply my mind to some form of reason in terms of the country is in crisis currently. We are in desperate need for PPE equipment, especially for the health services. And by the time we get the local manufacturing guys going again, because remember, as much as they could operate under essential services during lockdown, we couldn't meet the demand. So I think that what one should do, and we can do it on our different forums that we sit on, is for now, I can understand ITAC removing the duty and the VAT just to get a surplus of these products into the country to assist the country. But as soon as South African manufacturers can build up the capacity, like we've already started, we can obviously approach government in terms of supplying them. Now, we've done that when there was a huge request from the Department of Basic Education that was requesting 45 million masks a month. And that's the reason why we signed up the PPE agreement. So I see a gradual turn from government, where the demand now is for washable masks and not disposable masks. So I see the turn, and we've also seen a lot of orders come through from Netcare and Pathcare, and also from the South African Defence Force, increasing its local orders with the local supplies that they have. So it's beginning to start to increase the local manufacturing. So we'll raise it with ITAC, and we'll bring it to their attention, Mr. Greg Harrison, that they need to now look at what's available in the country now that the local manufacturing industry is geared and they are manufacturing the PPE products, and they should look at that, and they could start implementing once they have the full capacity list from the local sector, start implementing a duty and VAT, which will be applicable on these imported products.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much for your input. From the panelists, anyone to take any of these other questions? All right. Okay. All right. So I think we will go on and look at if there are no takers for the current questions.
Steady,
Hello.
The other question in terms of from Andrew Fenwick, good idea to have a central list of local suppliers that can produce various items that retailers may need in the short term and going forward. This could also be part of a Master Plan 2030. I think that's a good suggestion. We've started with PPE already, where we have sent out a circular to the industry, and basically compliant and non-compliant companies could populate a schedule of products that they do manufacture, and we got them accredited via the Bargaining Council, and we took that information, which formed part of the database, and we submitted it to national government so that they had a list of companies that they could approach in terms of PPE production. If we've done that and we've started that, I don't think we'd be opposed to looking at drawing up a list or building up a database that speaks to suppliers and the products that they can manufacture in South Africa. And we can share that list with customers, to retailers, to government as well. So it's a good suggestion. It's a good idea. Now that we started with PPE, maybe on the same light, we can continue doing the same with other products. Steady, I think you need to unmute again.
Oh, all right. Okay, thanks. All right, Herman, thank you very much for the response on that question with regards to the work that the Bargaining Council is already doing in structuring that work on the database for manufacturers. So I think this is the work that we are obviously going to grow as an industry, also use technology also to perfect it more. So I will look at the question on the data. So when we look at the data, it's a two-pronged approach that was used to get the data. So the data is the one from the National Bargaining Council for the clothing manufacturing. It's a direct data that we got from us last week. So the one that pertains to KZN clothing and manufacturing sector is now. Then the other data which talks to the sector, to the bigger sector, CTFL sector, is basically the planning data that was used for the CTFL master plan. So that's basically 2017-2018 data from the Department of Trade and Industry. So that includes the formal and informal. That's part of what we wanted to derive out of that, to look at sort of the total kind of employment around it. So that's basically what the data is. I believe it could be perfected if we speak directly to the bargaining councils and get some direct inputs out of them. But basically, this is the answer to where the data came from and which years it was taken from. I hope that one is answered, Andrew. So we will also look at Razin Dada's question, which is quite a good question. Look, we're speaking about 100-fold, 10-fold, I think, which is quite an ambitious target, but obviously we have to be very realistic as well, considering where we've come from the data that we have heard from Mr. Pillay, Herman Pillay. So it's a journey. So in this journey, if we can dream more, we will get more out of it. But from a planning perspective and a limited resource perspective, we believe that we have enough resources to double our output as a sector. And I think we obviously need to continue challenging, and your input challenge us more is actually a good input. And I think it's quite a good comment to allow us to dream more. But we're just trying to be more realistic now.
If I could
yes.
just to go back on the database, we can forward to the MEC's office a list of all accredited manufacturers in KZN for PPE products. We can send that list off on request by the MEC's office. We have it on standby. It's a list that has been vetted by the National Bargaining Council and industry stakeholders that make up that sit in the PPE collective. So I have a list of compliant and non-compliant companies that can be submitted. And then if I could just assist you on Razeen Dada's questions. It's actually great to see that someone is so passionate and so patriotic, especially back in KZN, which we all are KZN people. Whichever province we work in and we go to, we always represent KZN quite proudly. I think the question is, yes, you're right. Why not? We've always made a loud noise when it came to KZN. We always made a loud noise when it came to manufacturing and clothing and textiles and footwear and leather. I mean, KZN has the largest footwear competency in the country. A majority of knit mills are situated in KZN. The majority of manufacturers sit in KZN. You would have heard from my stat before, it's 43%. But the question is, why can't we garner local support from retailers? And I think that was the whole intention from the master plan. So the master plan basically was aimed at the retailers leading the master plan. That's the reason why it's called retail, clothing, textile, footwear, and leather. The retailers lead the master plan, and they direct the value chain in terms of increasing local capacity. And South Africa, if you look at in the 1990s, we had the best growing cotton farms in South Africa. They used to call it white gold. And in 2012, 2013, there were interventions to start reviving cotton farming in South Africa. I know that I started the initial engagement with Cotton South Africa and the Department of Rural Development and Land and Reform. And in 2012 to 2013, I think it was, I stand under correction, there were 3,000 farmers that were established in the Makatini area in KZN. So KZN is still has a high concentration in terms of expanding on cotton farming, and that's a huge plan that we have ahead. And in terms of positioning ourselves and strengthening ourselves and making ourselves grow in terms of numbers, yes, why not? We can do that. At the moment, just for Razeen Dada's to answer the question, why can't we be number one? KZN is number one currently in that equation. But I hear what you're saying in terms of why can't South Africa be, self-sustaining? I think if South Africa, and especially amidst this COVID-19, starts looking within themselves, we can really, really contribute to the socio-economic status of this country by stabilizing and uplifting society. So I hope that assists.
Great. Thank you very much, Herman. Thanks a lot. So I will do the last round of questions so that we will give 10 minutes to the MEC to give closing remarks and way forward. So the question that I will go on to is from Lisonelo Lisaona. The question is, thanks for the webinar and info being presented. Can we see more focus on small to medium enterprise benefits and opportunities in all this? A voice for the small to medium enterprise addressing challenges they face. So that's one question which I think our panelists can also assist in a way to answer. Then I'll go to the next question. Sorry, which is from Ahmed Mushi, which is, with the trying times we experience currently, we need to think without the box. Could we look at the extension of the minimum hours per week before overtime rates are factored in, maybe just for 6 months? Employers need to make up lost days and time. Employees need the income. So that's one more question. Good suggestion also from someone who's trying to look at another possible way that we can sustain. And so in the current times. So the last questions will be from Robert and Leila. So it's a 3-phased question. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and to all speakers, your inputs, presentations are on point. Here are the questions. What are the measures in place to support small and emerging players in the clothing and textile COVID-19 lockdown? Why is our government excluded? Why is our government excluding grassroots organized business associations in most of the engagements ETF with the various stakeholders, mostly black associations and formations? Then number 3 is on the issue of access to the raw materials. Does our government have any form of initiative or plan to support small factories to gain access to the reasonable priced materials without being bullied by the cartels who exclude small players in this industry? So I think we will open this to our panel to answer these questions before we hand over to the MEC to give closing remarks. Over to you, colleagues.
Steady, I just want to ask you, do we have a labor representative on the panel?
Sorry?
Do we have a labor representative, a representative from labor on the panel?
Unfortunately, the labor representative did not come. It was supposed to be Michael Shabalala, their national organizing secretary. So
to be fair to my other panelists, can I attempt to answer Mr. Ahmed Marchi's question on extending the hours of work for employees to make up for lost time? The answer basically is we are governed by the basic conditions of employment. Whatever intervention needs to be made must be fair on workers. Workers must get a fair deal out of it. We don't want, during this time, as much as workers are desperate, we do not want workers to be manipulated or being taken advantage of in any way. I'm an employer and I speak like this because we are passionate about our people. I feel that at plant level, that employer can negotiate with his employees or her employees and get them to somehow commit to plans of increasing productivity. But if you're looking at extended hours that speaks of moving away from the basic conditions of employment, then I would want to just make this point or drive this point that it must be fair to workers. Workers should be earning a wage, a good wage and fair wage in comparison to the laws that's stipulated in this country. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Herman. Thank you very much for your input. Any takers for the other questions, colleagues on the panel? All right. Okay, I think our forum is still an ongoing forum. We have all the questions. We have all the key panelists. So for all the questions that may not have been asked satisfactorily, what we will do is we will send to the panelists to sort of look at them. So when we are having our next round, we will probably have just an overview that talks to the questions that have been raised and the kind of answers that came out of it, maybe as implementation plans. So we thank you, panelists, for helping to answer these questions. And we thank you for the time that you have availed yourself in such a difficult time to give us such important information, which definitely is a good baseline foundational information for us to build forward. Now,
sorry, Herman. Just to be fair on Robert Ndledla, just to be fair on him, he is the Secretary General of FFRET.
Oh, yes.
Attempt to answer very quickly his questions, then we would have covered all questions.
Okay,
Question
great.
1, What are measures in place to support small and emerging players in the clothing and textile amid COVID-19 and lockdown? My answer to that is government has introduced relief packages for SMMEs that he can look up on the government website. Just as an example, there's 2 billion rand set aside for SMEs and spaza shop owners and other small businesses as an example. So he needs to log on to the government website to have a look at all these different packages that government and relief packages that government has made available. And number two, why is our government exclude grassroots organized business associations in most of the engagements? It must have it with various stakeholders, mostly Blacks associations formations. I agree with that. That's a question. I can't speak on behalf of government. I agree that they should be included in those discussions. Number three, on the issue of access to raw material, does our government have any form of initiative plan to support small factories to gain access to the reasonably priced material without being bullied by the cartels who exclude smaller players in this industry? My answer to that would be, in the clothing and textile industry, you have employer organizations. The employer organization that I belong to, which is the Apparel and Textile Association of South Africa, we are the voice of the small SMME that employs 5 to 50 or 5 to 70 people in the facility or in the factory. We can assist these small businesses by negotiating on their behalf, because we do it as a collaborative, we do it as a collective. We can negotiate on their behalf in order for them to get the same prices that the larger manufacturers get. So yes, there is an answer to question number three. My advice to him is he can contact our offices, the Apparel and Textile Association of South Africa, and tell us what assistance and what form of assistance he requires, and we'll try our best to assist him. Thank you, Steady.
Oh, great, great. Thank you very much, Herman. Thanks for a very powerful last contribution in the sense of that it's going to be one of the implementation actions that we can actually do as a quick hit for our small players. So we are very, very grateful for your support. And I mean, for everyone else as well that has attended. So from myself as the facilitator, I would like to thank all of you for participating, for attending, and I will hand over to the Honorable MEC, Mr. Ravi Pillay, to basically conclude today's meeting. We believe this is the start. We are going to have more meetings. We are going to come up with implementation plans, immediate ones that have come out of this forum. We are going to have engagements with each of the guys that have participated here so that we work together and move this ship as fast as we can. So over to you, Honorable Pillay, and give the vote of thanks and the closing remarks and hopefully the way forward also.
Thank you very much, Steady. Let me start by thanking you and all the panelists for a very insightful presentations. And I think the objective of the webinar has not only been reached, but exceeded. But we all I do that on the understanding that it's in the start of a long but potentially exciting journey that we could achieve some of the, I was very excited by some of the ambitions shown by some of your contributors. And I don't think we should rule it out as unrealistic. Let me just start with a few points. I think the first one I would like to add, Herman said he can't speak for government. I can, so let me do so. And make the point that this webinar was intended and planned to reach as many people as possible. And I think the person who asked that question is one of those reached. And the question was, are we excluding grassroots organizations? And in fact, if you know our government and our policy framework, many of the more established businesses might say, look, we're not even looking after them enough with having regard to our concentration on the grassroots organizations. But that's not to say that the policy interventions have been effective. And I think what COVID has done is brought us together to have some pretty frank discussions. I think there's an increasing narrative that there must be a legacy of this COVID, and that is to set new foundations and deal with historical issues in a new way, not as an adversarial way, but as one team. And after hearing the panel and following all the narratives in the country, I really think we are beginning to see that. I would have hoped that Edtea would have actually advertised this webinar on all its databases, which would include many grassroots organizations. And in fact, if you recall, when I listed the work streams earlier on, there's even a special work stream on the informal sector. So that's how determined we are to reach all sectors and in all corners of our province. But we take it in good spirit that you're emphasizing that point, and want to reassure you that we are committed to reaching grassroots organizations. In fact, if you look at the COVID structure from government point of view, we have the National Command Council, we have a Provincial Command Council, and then we're having already set up district command councils. And those district command councils are also broken up into clusters having to deal with the economic issues and plan for a post-COVID economic recovery. So we're still early days. The point I'm trying to make is that in each of the districts, we want to drill down to reach everyone, to maximize the opportunity that comes out of this exercise. The second point I want to make is that, and let me greet my comrade and colleague, Ina Cronje, if she's still listening. And I think we must take that, and I certainly will take that, the Buy South African, to see how we can actually put more weight into that particular program. And as I was listening to you guys, I was thinking that maybe the COVID messages should be expanded a bit. Stay safe, wash your hands, sanitize, and buy South African. You know, all these SMSs we are getting should perhaps start to include that kind of message, because there's a patriotic feel which we should exploit, and is a key part of the message. So we will take that through as well. I think there's a little bit of detail that we need to deal with as we go along, and I think Herman's suggestion of giving us that list on the PPE side, certainly much of the PPE might be done at a provincial level, and certainly there's a very firm policy position by the provincial government that we need to maximize the localization of that procurement. I think it's the how of that equation that we need to look at in detail. But again, I come back to the point that was already made. We are a little bit concerned that we mustn't leave the real small players out, but I understand from Herman's presentation that the agreements that you all have negotiated at a national level makes serious provision for that. And I think we need to interrogate that and get buy-in from all the principal stakeholders so we can actually implement that. I think we also take note of your challenge, and we must take it. And I would actually invite you to continue challenging us as government. I think the challenge was that provincial government must be part of some stimulus for the provincial sector, and I think that's a fair challenge. I think we just need to unpack it in terms of what national pros packages are underway, to what extent that is reaching our province. I've got meetings with all 4 banks lined up as part of the finance sector engagements, and the Edtea is also unpacking the detail of each of the grants and support measures that have been instituted from national level. I can share that we have been a little bit critical of our national counterparts in allowing a little bit of a gap to develop between their planning and pronouncements and then the provincial and local legs of the implementation. But that president was here yesterday. We raised that with him, and we think that will be sorted out within the next few days, actually. So we accept that challenge. Of course, the how much, and so on is something that we need to engage on. From where I'm sitting here at a first reflection, the issue of technology perhaps is an angle at which that support could be located. There's a bigger issue of IT and technology generally across all sectors, which we're wanting to get to grips with, and the clothing and textile technology could be one of the factors in that particular equation. And I think we'll be keen to engage on that. I also want to share the enthusiasm. I can't remember who it was, Mr. Dada, was it, who had this very great ambition. Why can't we be the best? Why can't we multiply by 100? And really, that's the patriotic spirit and enthusiasm we need, keeping our feet on the ground, of course. But when Herman starts talking about the cotton production and the Makatini flats, I think we have a little bit of a sense of why that didn't go as far as it should have. But again, in a post-COVID spirit, or not even a post-COVID spirit, while we're still awaiting the peak of the COVID, I think minds are quite concentrated, and we need to apply our minds to that. And I think provincial government will be very, very open to that. Of course, there's a much wider engagement on the economic sectors as a whole. I mean, at 6 o'clock, there's an engagement that's starting with the Chamber, I think it's the Chambers of Commerce, which MEC Nomusa Dube is engaging. And so this issue of the big retailers plugging into this plan, massifying the Buy South African program, and getting retailers to commit to the local production must become part of that bigger plan as well. And we certainly will take that up. We are quite impressed with the level of detail that the industry is showing in terms of preparation for day one, for example, and that level of detail actually educates us as well. I mean, we've got to open for 6,000 schools at some point, and the issues around safety and PPE is quite inherent in that kind of planning. So it's very similar detailed work that we have to do, and I'm sure we can learn from each other. I've noted that one of the presentations spoke to permits, permissions, and legal obstacles. It wasn't unpacked in detail, but I would think that it would be our job as provincial government, and Edtea in particular, to look at that, itemize it, and tackle it systematically. So too the issue of e-commerce. I must make the point that, and you would have, I'm sure, being the astute business people you are, you'd observe that these regulations are not cast in stone, and we've got to understand this risk-adjusted strategy that's imposed by national government. So on the one level, from our side as government, one of the reasons why we had to have the lockdown is to buy the time to prepare our health industry, the hospitals, and the infrastructure, and so on. So the more readiness we show on that side, the easier it becomes to go to a lower level of lockdown. And obviously, that's only one particular factor. On the other side is the actual infection rate and distancing and the kind of discipline that we can get society as a whole to demonstrate. But the point is that these regulations, the national leadership is open to persuasion on that. And I can assure you that when we pick up issues on a local level through the provincial command council, we then take it up either through the line function MECs to the national ministers, but more often directly from the premier to the president. So if we can itemize these issues that you are raising and prepare coherent and persuasive arguments, then there's no reason why we can't win steadily and incrementally on that. I think the big issue, which I don't have an answer for you at the moment, but I think it's I think ranking in the front of many minds, is the change in the geopolitics of the world and China as a source of so much supply chain issues. And is there a change? What is there a change? What impact it's going to have? And I think, without expressing a view on this matter, I think there's a growing feeling that we've got to act in our national interests. And what that means, we will unpack as we go along. But I think the sentiments that you raised, as far as that is concerned, will certainly be recorded, and we will certainly take it up and report it as you have put it. A number of other practical suggestions that you've made, which we've made notes on. Edtea, by the way, as I said, will be the line function department. There's Neville and his team, and the HOD, acting HOD, Mr. Mkiza, are leading teams whose task is to collate all this information in detail, break it down into a coherent presentation, and itemize it for action and reporting to the provincial council, led by the premier. The last thing I'd like to say is that I think out of this, and the team will look at it, we need a small working team that can work on the nuts and bolts of what has come out of this presentation. I would like to think that I am speaking without authority, but I'll certainly recommend to MEC, and we'll put it to the economic cluster, that perhaps we should invite a direct presentation by a representative either to the economic cluster or directly to the provincial command council at some point in time. I can confess that when we were dividing these 12 work streams amongst us as MECs to say who will assist in convening, obviously the finance and fundraising was a natural choice for me, having regard to my portfolio as MEC for finance. But I also volunteered in the clothing and textile sector because I have a little bit of an affinity understanding the history and strength of the sector in our province. And I'd like to humbly say that I share your passion to reinstate this particular sector to the kind of potential it has. So thank you very much, and we certainly commit to working together with you to taking this effort to the next stage. Thank you, Steady. Thank you, Neville. Thank you, panel. And thank you to all those who took the trouble to log in. And I hope it was a fruitful exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, MEC.
Thank you very much. The meeting is officially closed, but the engagements will continue with the same enthusiasm and even more enthusiasm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steady, and thank you, panelists.